So last week marked the 19th anniversary of 9/11, and thinking back a little bit, I think I was in 7th grade at the time in 2001, and that was probably the last time I felt that America was truly united. I don't know what it is, but it seems like there has been this cultural, tribalistic civil war brewing in this country ever since. Anyway, I'll get into it more later on in this video, but first off, thanks for joining me. My name is James Lee. You're watching 5149. Today, I want to use this tweet that I saw directed at Susan Sarandon as the jumping off point of our Thinking Out Loud session. So in response to this tweet from Sarandon, basically giving support to Ryan Knight, an activist who once represented this neoliberal resistor crowd, but has recently been very critical of Biden and the Democratic establishment, and he's been involved in other things like the People's Convention, which seeks to create a new movement and party free of corporate money and influence. So Ryan has been relentlessly attacked for simply speaking up about these shortcomings of Joe Biden, and has even been accused of being a Russian asset deployed to re-elect Trump. This is wild. Anyway, in response to Sarandon's tweet defending Knight, someone responded with, "Hi, progressive kids. Imagine maybe no 9/11, no Iraq war, no financial crash, and 20 years ahead battling climate change. You can't because Auntie Susan Sarandon did the same third-party thing to climate czar Al Gore, who lost to Bush by only a handful of votes." This kind of set me off a little bit because I know this tweet is from a random person, but how did we get to the point where we're now falsely equating honest conversations from open-minded people who are just not okay with the status quo of the current Democratic and Republican duopoly to somehow being responsible for events like 9/11. To explain this, I'm going to turn to an idea from an old professor of mine. His name is Jonathan Haidt, and he's a social psychologist who teaches at NYU. And when I was getting my MBA there, I took a class from him called Professional Responsibility. It was a required business and ethics course we all had to take to graduate. And actually, it was one of the more interesting classes I took. It was only 3 days, though, which goes to show where the priorities are in business school, that ethics only accounts for a tiny fraction of the curriculum. But I digress. That's a whole different discussion. Anyway, so back in 2016, Professor Haidt wrote an article titled, "Why Universities Must Choose One Telos, Truth or Social Justice." In the article, he writes, Aristotle often evaluated a thing with respect to its telos, which means its purpose, end, or goal. The telos of a knife is to cut. The telos of a physician is health or healing. What is the telos of a university? The most obvious answer is truth. The word appears on many university crests, but increasingly many of America's top universities are embracing social justice as their telos, or as a second and equal telos. But what happens if they conflict? He goes on to give an example of what a truth-focused university is like versus a social justice-focused university. So at Truth University, there is no such thing as blasphemy. Bad ideas get refuted, not punished. On the other hand, a social justice university is about A, finding and eradicating disparate treatment, which he argues is actually a good thing, which never conflicts with truth, and B, finding and eradicating disparate outcomes without regard for disparate inputs or third variables. Haidt argues that it is this latter part which causes all of the problems, all the conflicts with truth. In the real world, there are many disparities of inputs, but anyone who mentions such disparities on campus is guilty of blasphemy and must be punished. Does that sound familiar? I mean, it does to me in the context of Biden versus Trump. I mean, just bringing up mild critiques about Joe Biden or mention the name Tara Reid, and the blue check Twitter resistance police is going to freak out and then accuse you of being alt-right adjacent or working to re-elect Trump. It's just a really toxic environment to be in. And to further dive into this truth versus social justice idea, I'm going to play a clip from Professor Haidt's appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast explaining how this negatively impacts discussions about important yet complicated and nuanced issues like race relations in America.
Again, it makes sense if you look at the different games.
Yes.
So if you're on a university and you think you're playing the truth game, and philosophers are great at this, they're always unpacking terms. And so you might try to define racism or any sort of ism, and a common sense view would be an expression of hostility or resentment or limitation on a group based on their identity. But that's if you're playing the truth-seeking game. If you're playing the politics game or the warfare game, you want to define the terms to give your side maximum advantage. So if my goal as a scholar is to prosecute my enemies and maximally convict them, and I am always trying to defend, 7 different identity groups against the straight white men, they're the accused. I want to define my terms to make it maximally easy to convict.
So as you can see, we're now in an environment where winning, whatever that means, is prioritized above truth-seeking. It's not even that truth-seeking is deprioritized, but it's somehow not even allowed. People nowadays, whether they be independent media personalities or activists, we're no longer able to talk about or engage in honest conversations about Joe Biden, like talking about the negative effects of his 1994 crime bill or support of NAFTA and how that's decimated manufacturing jobs across the U.S. We can't talk about that without being labeled or accused of being privileged or supporting neo-fascism, or the preposterous connection that I referred to at the beginning of the video where Susan Sarandon, because she talked about the need for a third party, is now somehow responsible for bringing about 9/11 and the Iraq War. Really quickly, I want to bring up a quote from John Stuart Mill, a 19th century English philosopher who wrote that he who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good and no one may have been able to refute them, but if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either option. What he's saying here is that we have to understand all sides of the issue to be able to truly advocate for the position we believe in. We need this back and forth. We need this nuance. Because in my opinion, this truth-seeking versus warfare attitude has led to a complete erosion of facts and has created this hyper-partisan tribal environment where we can't even have reasonable conversations anymore. Because it's now super easy just to question and refute simple facts because we don't trust others to act in good faith. I mean, how many times do we dispel something by attacking the source instead of the information? Oh, it's Fox News, or it's MSNBC, or it's Nancy Pelosi, it's Trump, and so on and so forth. They have an agenda, so whatever they're saying, it's BS. If we take a look at a recent Pew Research poll, they found that only 28% of Americans agree with the statement that people agree on basic facts, even if they disagree politically. And this number is pretty much the same for those who identify as Democrats versus Republicans. And it's perfectly natural to think and feel this way. If we believe that people are not acting in good faith, they're drafting arguments or cherry-picking data for the sake of winning an argument instead of trying to find an equitable solution, it's not hard to fathom why so many people don't trust even the most basic of facts. And this in turn has led to some really toxic behavior, not only across different parties, but just among people who actually agree on most things. A big problem that I see with this warfare mentality is that we don't take the time to self-reflect about our own beliefs and our ideas because we're so busy just trying to win the war. I'll pause here today with this question. I would love to hear people's thoughts on this. The question, is it an inherent privilege to take a position where truth-seeking is the underlying foundation of trying to create a fair, equal, and just society for everyone? Or are we really in a time that we need to pursue or engage in this pseudo-oppressive environment where it's not even okay to voice legitimate criticism of someone you support, as in the case of Susan Sarandon, because she's publicly stated that she is voting for Biden. So are we in a sense condoning this oppressive environment just in an all-out effort to remove Trump, a guy that many people have labeled as neo-fascist? I would love to hear everyone's thoughts about this. I obviously believe in the former because I want people to have the information to make an informed choice in our democracy, because I believe it's crucial to the longevity of the democracy. If we're constantly faced with the choice of eating either a full bowl of shit versus eating half a bowl of shit, I don't think that's a sustainable strategy nor a society that is very pleasant for most of us to live in. Anyway, I got a little academic with this one, but I appreciate everyone for sticking with me and watching. I truly do want to hear your thoughts on this. Also, please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and if you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Just know that you are helping create and build an infrastructure for an independent media to take on the entrenched establishment. So I really appreciate it. My name is James Lee. I'll be back again next week. And as always, thank you so much for your time.